Everyone, welcome. I'm happy to see so many of you joining today from across the UAE and beyond. Thank you for carving time out of your busy day to be here. I'm Arun Gupta from Factum, the team behind RapidAML. As part of Factum, I work at the intersection of sales, marketing, and product development, helping organizations like yours navigate the always evolving compliance landscape. My passion lies in connecting FIs with solutions that genuinely transform how they approach regulatory challenges. Today's conversation is particularly important as we dive into compliance challenges that affect so many of your organizations directly. In the next 1 hour, we'll explore the nuanced world of UAE AML regulations with a special focus on what this means for DNFBPs. You'll gain clarity on your key obligations, uncover smarter ways to manage compliance risk, and walk away with actionable strategies to strengthen your overall compliance framework. Our goal is for you to leave this session feeling both informed and equipped to take immediate action. Today's session is brought to you by Factum, where compliance meets innovation for the digital age. As a risk technology innovator, we built solutions from the ground up to be cloud native, scalable, and responsive to the rapidly evolving financial crime landscape. We understand the unique pressures you face as compliance professionals. Our mission is to turn your compliance challenges into high performance processes, providing you speed, assurance, and a competitive edge. At the core of Factum's offering is RapidAML, an end-to-end platform designed to streamline your entire AML journey. From initial KYC to customer screening and risk assessment, RapidAML brings sophisticated compliance capabilities within reach for organizations of all sizes. What sets us apart is our careful attention to both global standards and local UAE regulatory requirements, ensuring you're covered on all fronts. We're particularly excited about our collaboration with NIEMA for today's session. Their specialized knowledge of AML compliance across the UAE and wider GCC region brings an invaluable dimension to our discussion today. This partnership allows us to bridge theoretical requirements with practical on-the-ground implementation strategies. Now, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce to you Dipali Vora, a distinguished voice in AML CFT compliance, whose insights have guided countless organizations through regulatory complexity. Dipali brings a wealth of hands-on regulatory experience that pairs perfectly with Factum's focus on delivering practical, technology-driven compliance solutions. Through NIEMA, she's been instrumental in elevating compliance standards across the region. Before we dive in, I encourage you all to actively engage throughout the session. Your questions and perspectives can enrich the conversation for everyone. Please use the Q&A feature whenever something comes to mind. No need to hesitate. We love questions, so type them in the chat as they come, and our team will be answering them in real time right there in the chat. With that said, I'm excited to hand the floor to Dipali, who will take us into the heart of UAE AML requirements, breaking down what's expected and how to stay ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Arun, for the introduction. So, as very well explained by Arun, today we are going to dive deep into what are the AML CFT regulations applicable to the DNFBP segment. So, starting with, we'll first understand what is the AML CFT structure in UAE with respect to the legal regulations. So, the primary regulation is Federal Decree Law number 20 of 2018, okay, on anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism and illegal organizations. Apart from that, we also have Cabinet Decision number 10 of 2019. So Federal Decree Law actually tells us that what are we supposed to do? But how do we implement that? That comes under Cabinet Decision number 10 of 2019. Now, this was something which was issued in 2018 and 2019. There were certain amendments which also came up, okay, and that were formalized by the government through Federal Decree Law number 26 of 2018. So what happens is to just highlight, the basic amendments which were done in the upcoming regulations were inclusion of VASPs. So Cabinet Resolution was also further amended and Cabinet Resolution number 24 of 2022 was introduced. So this actually lays the basic foundation of the AML CFT structure in United Arab Emirates. Apart from that, we also have Cabinet Resolution number 74 of 2020, which deals with targeted financial sanction. So basically, the requirement with respect to screening the customers, reporting, freezing the funds, etc., comes from Cabinet Resolution number 74 for 2020. In addition to that, we also have Cabinet Resolution number 16 of 2021, that is with respect to the violations and administrative fines. In addition to that, we have Cabinet Decision number 109 of 2023, which is with respect to beneficial owner procedures. Now, this is something which are the basic resolutions, federal decree laws which are introduced. But the government have also come up with sector-specific guidelines. Sector-specific guidelines basically acts as a material for us, reference material where we can actually look at the practical aspects of implementing the AML CFT law. So there are specific guidelines with respect to auditors. There is one guidelines for designated non-financial businesses and professions. So in this particular regulation, they talk about what are the general obligations that a DNFBP are required to do. But with respect to some sector specific guidelines or I would say material to help us implement are actually covered under the specific sector wise guidelines, that is supplemental guidance for auditors, dealers in precious metals and stones, real estate sector, trust and company service providers. And also, we have lawyers' guide on anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism and financial of illegal organizations. So basically, what happens is in this particular guidelines, what I would like to highlight is there are some real cases which are provided there, which would really be helpful for us to practically implement that in our organization. So this is something that every specific sector must always refer. Now, in UAE specifically talking, there are certain supervisory authorities who actually oversee that whether a specific company is following the AML CFT rules and regulations or not. So all of the UAE mainland companies and free zone companies are supervised by Ministry of Economy. Now, if there is any lawyer's firm which is registered with Ministry of Justice, the supervisory authority would be Ministry of Justice, specifically in case of lawyers. Now, Abu Dhabi Global Market, that is the ADGM, that is supervised by Financial Services Regulatory Authority, also known as FSRA. Dubai International Financial Center is supervised by DFSA, that is Dubai Financial Services Authority. Now, I would all request you to please switch on your phones and just scan this QR to answer a very small quiz. This is just to make sure that whatever topic we discuss, you are actually getting hold of it, like you're not confused, you are able to understand what we are trying to impart. So I would request everybody to scan this QR and give the answers for the quiz. So you can keep your phones in your hand only because there are going to be quiz after every few slides. Okay. So I'll wait for few responses and then I guess we can move ahead. Okay. I would at least like to see 50 responses. Only then I'll discuss. Okay. So the first question, who are classified as the designated non-financial businesses and professions under the UAE AML CFT laws and regulation? So basically there were around 7 options and you had the option to answer at least 5. So I guess majority of you have answered correctly, but few of them have selected virtual asset service providers and I think even car dealers. So in UAE rules and regulation context, DNFBP definition covers only 5 industries, that is auditors and accountants, real estate agents and brokers, lawyers, notaries, and other legal service providers, precious metal dealers, and corporate service providers. VASP is a separate category, and car dealer is something which so far in UAE is not covered. Who is the supervisory authority for the TCSPs operating in the UAE mainland? So this is the second question. And see. Okay. Majority of you answered the Ministry of Economy, which is the correct answer. Ministry of Finance is not the right answer. Ministry of Anti-Money Laundering is also not relevant here. And Ministry of Justice is specifically for the lawyers. Yeah. So moving forward, now that we've understood that what are the rules and regulations which are governing in UAE with respect to AML CFT law, let's understand the basic obligations that a DNFBP has. If you can see, there's a 12 points which is now visible on the screen. So first and foremost, we have to appoint and decide that who will be overseeing the AML CFT function in our organization. That is the MLRO or the compliance officer. Once we have identified that person, the next step would be registering on GoML portal. So ideally, GoML registration was something which is, simultaneously be done when a company is incorporated. It was introduced in 2021. Last date was 30 April for all of the existing companies who were coming under the purview of the DNFBP. So this is one of the mandatory requirements, okay, that is GoML registration. And at the same time, appointment of compliance officer. We are going to understand all of these steps in, I would say, little in a depth manner in the upcoming slides, but right now I'm only giving you a brief explanation. The third step would be MLFT risk assessment. So basically, here we are required to understand the risk of our organization. What kind of business we are into, what kind of customers we are going to deal with. So that is something that evaluation has to be done in point number 3. Once we have evaluated the risk of our organization, only then we'll be able to draft the AML CFT policies of our company. So that is point number 4. What are the points that we need to keep in mind when we are drafting the policy and procedures? Again, I'm going to cover that in the upcoming slide. In point number 5, it's important that the staff members, the employees, the senior management are trained on the AML CFT subject. Unless and until they don't realize that what risk it is carrying, and if in case the employees don't know that what is AML CFT, what are their obligations, that would be a complete system failure. So it's important that we make our staff employees aware about what their obligation is and what it could cause if this particular thing is not complied with. Now, after that, we will, like, right now we talk about the documentation, training, etc. Now we are talking about the actual implementation of the policies. See, it's not just like we draft one and keep it in our organization. No, that's not the reason of complying. We are required to actually comply with the regulations by performing KYCs. KYCs is identifying the customers whom we are going to onboard. Once that is done, what documents we will see, that also I'll explain. I'll come to that point also. The next step would be screening the customers. Screening the customers against the sanction list, politically exposed person database, adverse media, in order to understand the background of the customers that we are going to associate with. Once these 2 steps are done, that's KYC and name screening, the next step would be customer risk assessment. Customer risk assessment is the process whereby you are going to bifurcate your customers into the categories of low, medium, or high, depending upon the risk that particular customer is carrying. So there are various factors which are involved while ascertaining the risk of the prospective customer. That is also something that we will understand. The next step is ongoing monitoring. So once you have onboarded the customer, you will have a long-term association with them, or maybe even short-term. Maybe you have onboarded them for one-off transaction, but still, depending upon I would say, the time that you're going to associate with your client, there is this requirement of ongoing monitoring. That if it is low risk, medium risk, how frequently are we going to check that the risk which I have allotted to my customer, is it valid, or how frequently I need to check it? So we'll understand more on the ongoing monitoring also, because that's a very, very important aspect which most of the companies fail to address. At the time, the companies do have policies, they do perform KYCs, but ongoing monitoring, re-KYC, that's always one of the factor which is missed out by the companies. So this is something that we're going to pay attention to and understand it in more detail. Next comes regulatory reporting. Regulatory reporting is basically where if you come across certain suspicious persons, how do you report them? What are the designated transactions? Which reports are to be filed on the GoML portal? That is something that we will understand. UAE has, I would say, around 8 reports, which I mean, out of that, few are common for all, but there are certain sector specific reports as well. Now, so far we have policies, we have done training, we have done KYCs, we are also reporting. The next and the most important part is record keeping. Unless and until I can't prove that I did something, okay, how will the regulatory understand that I'm complying with the law if I don't have substantial proof? If I say that I have a policy, but where is the policy? No, we discarded it. Where is the KYC? Where are the documents? If we are unable to prove our claim, it's all futile. And the last step is independent audit. Independent audit is whereby a third party would actually verify our AML CFT structure and come back to us that where are the gaps? What are the aspects where we still require improvement, or we are, falling back. So that is something where independent audit would be really very helpful. So now we have understood the basic structure, 12 steps. What are the basic obligations of the DNFBP? Now we are going to dive into each of this topic where we'll have a very brief discussion on that. Appointment of AML CFT compliance officer. So we discussed that we have to first identify a person that who will be able to, oversee the AML CFT functions in an organization. So there are certain qualities that you would expect from an MLRO. That is having the regulatory knowledge. They must have technical proficiency, maybe in their job, or I would say the duties that they are performing. They would have to access screening softwares, GoML portal, which are actually technical. So it's important that they have certain knowledge about how to work on a screening software. Okay, what are GoML portal, filing of reports? So that is something which would be expected from a compliance officer. Compliance officer at times acts as a bridge between the regulatory authorities, okay, and the senior management, employees, and the senior management. So because of this, it's important that they have excellent communication skills. So these are the few expectations that it's there from a compliance officer, that they know what is risk based approach, literally, like not just from the books, but how to apply them in spirit in their day to day activities. They must have analytic and problem solving skills. Many times the agents would come back to you, the compliance officer, that okay, I'm having this problem, I find this particular customer as suspicious. So compliance officer would be the one who will step up and take the decision or do the investigation. So the person whom we are appointing as the compliance officer needs to have certain basic qualities. The next step is GoML registration. Once we have identified the person, the next step would be that we have to inform the authorities that, okay, this is the person that I'm going to appoint as my compliance officer. So GoML registration is divided into 2 steps. First is SACM registration, and second is GoML registration, where we actually create our account. To explain you in a layman language, in step one, that is the SACM registration stage, what we actually do is that, say, for example, you have identified Mr. A as the compliance officer. So, in step one, you are going to inform your supervisory authority that this is Mr. A and I wish to appoint this person as my compliance officer. So, step one is where you're informing that Mr. A is the compliance officer, and then you receive the approval. Okay, so in stage one, it's basically that we receive the approval from the supervisory authority for appointment of a compliance officer. A compliance officer can only be appointed after we have received the approval of the supervisory authority. That is a prerequisite requirement. Once we have completed with stage one, we will be allotted a username and a secret key. By using the secret key, we can download Google Authenticator app, add the secret key. So what will happen is our app will start generating 6-digit passcodes. With the help of Google Authenticator, we'll be able to log into the GoML portal, create our account, submit all of the details, company details, compliance officer details, and again submit the application to the FIU. FIU will review, and then they will approve it, and we'll be allotted an organization entity number. which would be a 5-digit number. That is the conclusive evidence that GoML registration is completed. At the time of registration, there are certain documentation requirement also that you are required to submit. That includes an authorization letter. Means me as a company is authorizing Mr. A that you are going to be the compliance officer. You will have user as well as admin rights. So that happens. That is one of the document which is required. Apart from that, we are also required to submit the ID documents of the compliance officer and the trade license copy of the company. Now, this is something which I'm talking about very basic requirement. Depending upon the company is located into which zone, like say for example DIFC or ADGM, the document requirement may vary. So it is important that we are referring the GoML registration guide, which clearly tells us that what document are to be submitted in what cases. Okay, depending upon your supervisory authority, the documentation requirement might vary. So it's important that we check that and only then initiate the GoML registration process. Okay, then comes risk assessment. So risk assessment, as I said, here we are actually required to understand the risk of our company. Okay, let's say I am a TCSP. Okay, I am into company and corporations. I am providing nominee director services. I am providing my registered office address also to some other companies. So what first I'll do is I'll first understand what kind of business I'm doing or I'm going to do in cases of new organization. Once that overview is done, we'll identify the risk which is associated. Risk association here means that, for example, in corporations, I'm only doing for foreign countries, like all of the persons who are maybe residing in foreign countries and want to have a business here and they are getting incorporation done through maybe, nominee director shareholders. So there lies a risk. Now, from what area, what geography those customers are belonging to, that will also be the reason for which will impact my risk. So basically, I'll first understand my business, identify what are the possible risks which my company can face. I gave you the example of TCSPs, but let's say if it's dealers in precious metals and stones, the risk would differ depending upon the type of the business they are into. A retailer would have a different risk, a wholesaler will have a different risk, a bullion exchange dealer will have a different risk, a refinery will have a different risk. So it's important that once we understand our business, we identify the risk scenarios. After the risk scenarios we've identified, we will then understand that how frequently that is happening in my organization. Let's say I have 100 customers. Now out of that 100 customers, if 80 of my customers are politically exposed person, so that is definitely going to impact my company's overall risk. Okay, which is also backed with the kind of the services I provide. So yes, depending upon how frequently a specific scenario is occurring in my organization will also affect my company's risk. So here, to sum up, I mean, this particular slide, when I talk about, the enterprise-wide risk assessment or firm-wide risk assessment or business risk assessment, it's basically the holistic risk calculation of my company depending on the factors like the customers that I'm dealing with, the type of transactions that I do, how I do cash, virtual assets, or it's only bank transfer or international bank transfer. The geography of my customers, where are they coming from? Like FATF, grey list, blacklist, or high risk jurisdictions. So, where are they coming from? Other sanctioned countries. So, all of these factors are going to affect my company's overall risk. So, that calculation is called as enterprise wide risk assessment. The underlying principle of the AML CFT rule and regulation is risk based approach. It means that wherever you find more risk, more controls will be implemented. Wherever the risks are less, okay, less controls will be implemented. So in this EWRA process, we have to consider various aspects like risk appetite of the management. Like if the management says that, I don't want to deal with crypto or I don't want to have cash transactions, so that should be clearly visible in the EWRA which is done for the organization. So risk appetite statement is also very important. And we are also required to identify that the control measures. Here, control measures in terms of MLFT risk assessment would be performing KYC, doing screening, doing risk assessment. If required, if the customer is suspicious, we may file SAR, STR. If the customer is high risk, we may perform enhanced due diligence. So these are the types of the controls that each scenario would have. So that is ultimately called as the enterprise-wide risk assessment. Once the EWRA is done, we can then proceed with policy drafting. But before I discuss that topic, I would request you all to again scan this QR and answer this quiz on the topics we just discussed. I'll wait for a few more responses till I discuss the answers. Okay. So a DNFPB is required to appoint an AML CFT compliance officer under UAE regulation. So the correct answer is true. You are required to appoint. This is the mandatory requirement. So I think one or two persons would have answered false. That is why there was this small blue line. Let's go to the next question. Which of the following statements best reflects the objective of conducting an enterprise-wide risk assessment of money laundering and terrorism financing under the UAE AML safety framework? Okay, so let's see how many of you have answered. Okay, 87% of people have answered to assess inherent MLFT risk across all business lines, identify control gaps, and ensure risk-based allocation of AML CFT resources. So that is the correct answer, because here we are not missing any points. We are talking about calculation of inherent risk. We are here also identifying the gaps if there are there when it comes to control mechanism, and making sure that we are implementing the principle of risk based approach. So rest other answers which people have selected, to identify and mitigate risk only related to customer onboarding process, that is not the correct answer. We are here talking about the holistic risk assessment of the organization as a whole. Yeah. Moving on, the next question. A real estate broker in Abu Dhabi has been in operation since 2024 but has never registered on GoML. They claim that they only deal with the corporate clients through bank transfers and have never handled large cash transactions. What is the best course of action for the firm? Okay. So when you think about the situation, the first thing that should come to mind is that whether a real estate brokerage comes under the DNFBP definition or not. If the answer is yes, it's very evident that they are required to get themselves registered on GoML, irrespective whether they are handling cash, okay, or they are dealing with corporate clients and making sure only bank transfer is there. This is not the reason, or I would say this is not the way that we define that whether GoML registration is to be done or not. If it's a DNFBP, you have to register. Maybe even after registering on GoML portal, you are not performing any designated transaction which requires any kind of reporting. That is altogether a different scenario. But registration is mandatory. So what 82% have answered, proceed with GoML registration immediately, is the correct answer. Rest is not the right answer. The one who have selected register on GoML only if they start accepting cash. No, that is not the case. Moving on. So far we discussed about the AML CFT, enterprise-wide risk assessment. The next step would be drafting AML CFT policy and procedure documents. Once we have understood the risk of our organization, only then we will be able to draft the AML CFT policy, which is very much customized as per my company's risk. Okay, so there are few aspects that we should keep in mind when we are drafting policies, that we are inclined towards, uh, managing the risk of ML and FT. We have clearly defined customer onboarding and exit circumstances. What are the regular compliances that I'll be doing? Appointment of compliance officer. How will suspicious activity and suspicious transaction reporting be done in the organization? We are also required to document the requirement of confidentiality and prohibition against tipping off. So that is one of the important term that many of organization doesn't know. That if you have got a screening match, or if you think that a particular person is suspicious, you are not required to go and tell them. That is something which is to be kept confidential. Even if you're reporting suspicious activity report or suspicious transaction report, you're not required to inform this, discuss this directly, indirectly with the concerned person, okay, or any other person who is associated with that specific individual for whom you are filing a report. So, this is something which must be documented in the policy. How frequently training will be done, how will the training will be done, record keeping, for how many years you're going to maintain the records, and the most important part is how are you going to comply with the sanction, targeted financial sanction requirement in the organization. These are the basic things that must be part of the AML CFT policy and procedures. Again, I would like to highlight the fact that every policy and procedure would be different. Every company sector is different. The kind of customers they deal with are different. Let me give an example of real estate agent and broker. How much I have known this sector so far, every real estate agent and broker, they specialize in a specific country. Like, let's say I am an Indian and I am, having a company there. Majority of my customers are going to be Indian, maybe who are settled in India also, or who are settled in UAE. If somebody is from UK, majority of their customers come from UK. So every company's risk is different. The kind of customers they deal with is different. So it is not something that I pick out, a skeleton of another company, just edit my name and implement. That is not the correct approach. Okay. Moving on, AML CFT training and awareness. So this is very important. All of the employees and staff which are working in our organization, they must be educated on the terms of money laundering, financing of terrorism, why they are regulated, what are they required to do, because only then they will understand the seriousness of this topic. Here I don't want to highlight, about fines, penalties. No, I want to tell you that when something will happen with respect to money laundering, financing of terrorism, that we are acting as a aid. If somebody has, entered into our customer list, which is basically dangerous, the risk that the company will face is beyond repair. So it's not about fines and penalties, it's about the risk that the company would face. So, in order to safeguard the organization from the risk of money laundering and financing of terrorism, proliferation financing, it is important that the training is being provided to the staff members. Here, it is very important that we also understand that, the tone of the top, like even senior management should also be equally involved when it comes to compliances. If they are not serious, the staff will not be serious. So in this case, even MLRO plays a very important role to spread awareness in the organization that why are we required to comply? What is the requirement? What are the reporting obligations? This is something which is non-negotiable. We have to do it. So it's very important that, yeah, this will only be achieved if proper training and guidance is provided to the staff of our organization. The next, KYC and KYB. So far, training, policies, procedures, documentation is all done. Let's talk about the practical implementation of the policies and procedures. So we are required to perform know your customer, know your business. So our customers are going to be individuals or they're going to be corporate. Depending upon the nature of that, we will be deciding that what all documents or information we will seek from them. As a part of the identification, like know your customer, from individual, we will seek their ID document. Okay, that could be a passport, driving license, Emirates ID, a valid one. Like it's not expired. It has to be a valid one that has a photograph issued by a government. So these are the things that we should keep in mind when we are accepting an ID document. When it comes to address verification, we must get their utility bill, okay, not older than 3 months. Municipal tax record, property purchase or rent agreement, bank statement. Okay, bank statement also not older than 3 months. It should have a date on which that was generated. The name of the account holder, address of the account holder is something that should be there on that document if you are accepting that as the address proof. Or any other government issued document which captures the address. Now, any other government document again depends upon what country they are belonging to. Many countries do have that, a central registry where you can find the details. So if you're relying on something like that, make sure it's latest, it's valid, and it has the name of the customer. Apart from that, These are the ID documents. You'll get most of the information from that ID document only, but there are certain other information which you might not get from the ID document, like the details of the employer, address of the employer, occupation of that person, whether they are having their own business. If they are having their own business, what is the name of that company? Okay, what is the address of that company? If they are in employment, who is their employer? What is the address of the employer? So this is something that we need to identify, and also the purpose of transaction. This is the requirement when it comes to the natural person. If it's a corporate legal entity, just like any other ABC Limited, ABC LLC, something like that. In such cases, we must have their certificate of incorporation or trade license copy, whatever the case may be, depending upon the corporate. Where are they located? Where was the company incorporated? Accordingly, you can decide that what document you will get. Maybe in some cases, you will get both the document, even certificate of incorporation and trade license copy. Apart from that, we are also required to have memorandum of association, articles of association. Certificate of good standing is a good to have document in case if a company is like 40, 50 years old, located in some other country. It's good to have that document to check that whether that's active or not. Okay, so that would be acting as a substantial proof that yes, certificate of good standing, they are an active business and they are actually having some operations. In other cases, trade license copies, COI, memorandum, and articles is something that we need. Now, memorandum is important because from there we'll get the information about the shareholders. With respect to the address verification, again, utility bill, municipal tax record, property purchase or rent agreement, bank statement. But here, one important thing is that it should be in the name of the company. Okay. Now, when we deal with a corporate, we are also required to identify the directors, ultimate beneficial owners, partners, or shareholders. In order to identify the UBOs, we have to understand that the threshold which is set in UAE is 25%. So any person who's holding more than 25% in the shares in that company would be considered as the UBO. So in that case, we are also required to seek the address and ID proof of that particular director, shareholder, that particular UBO. Again, the next stage is control. If you do not find anybody from shareholding, the next step would be to identify who has the control in that organization. If even not that, then you may consider the senior management as the UBO. But here I want to highlight that if a company is not sharing the information, so considering the senior management as the UBO is not the way out. Okay. If the scenario, circumstances, shareholding is only such that you are unable to reach somebody who is the UBO, only then you have the last option as the senior management to be considered as the UBO. Once this stage is done, the next step would be screening. But before that, let's have a short quiz. Okay. So the first question. A designated non-financial business in Dubai is undergoing an internal compliance review. The firm has generic AML CFT policies copied from an international template with no reference to its own customers' risk profile, product types, or UAE specific regulatory requirement. What is the best course of action in this scenario? So, majority of you have selected the correct answer is immediately update the AML CFT policy and procedures to reflect the firm's business model, risk assessment, and UAE legal framework. So, in the previous slide, we just saw that these are the prerequisites that must be there in the policy. So, I'm sure that majority of you have understood. We cannot retain the existing policy because that wouldn't be right. Okay, because it refers regulations of some other country. It is not even specific to our company, our business, our risk. So that's a wrong approach. The next question. A real estate agency has a team of sales agents who interact directly with the clients. The agency assumes AML obligations are only relevant to back office staff and has limited training to them alone. What is the most appropriate course of action? Okay. So majority of you have answered it correctly. Extend the AML CFT training to all the employees, especially client facing roles, and tailor it to their responsibilities. Absolutely. The law tells us that we should have role specific training. So if I am the MLRO, I should have an extensive training. If I'm an employee, if I'm client facing, I should have relevant training with respect to what are the rules and regulations, KYC, suspicious activity reporting. So this is something where that would be more helpful for you, for me. So yes, extending AML CFT training to all employees, especially client facing roles, and you know tailoring it to their responsibilities is absolutely on point approach. A TCSP has a client where ownership is divided into four shareholders, each holding 25%. All shareholders are identified and verified. Upon closer review, it is discovered that one of them is acting under a power of attorney for another unnamed individual. What is the most appropriate response? Let's see what is the answer. Okay. Again, majority of you have answered it correctly. Obtain and verify the identity of the ultimate person behind the power of attorney and reassess the UBOs. Yes. So, as per the law, if there is any other person behind a specific transaction, we have to identify who that person is. UBO could also be present in an individual. Maybe I am the face, but there is somebody who is backing my transaction. I am acting upon somebody else's instructions, or I'm holding a power of attorney of some other person. So KYC and due diligence must be done for both the individuals, not just one party with whom you're actually dealing. So after the due diligence, only then you can ascertain that whether suspicious transaction report is to be filed or not. Only, merely because there is some UBO unnamed individual, we should not go for STR filing, because I believe few of them have selected that also. File an STR immediately. So that wouldn't be correct. That we will come to know at a later stage when due diligence is completed. If required, only then we may take that call. Now the next step, name screening. Now, once we have got the KYC documents, the next step would be screening them against the sanction list. That is relevant sanction list. Relevant sanction list in terms of UAE would be mandatory ones are UNSC consolidated list and UAE local terrorist list. But in addition to that, applying the risk-based approach principle, if we are also dealing with global clients, okay, we must make sure that we are screening them against the specific sanction list also, like OFAC, European Union, UK HMT, Red Notice, country-specific sanction list of where our client is belonging to. We must also screen them against the politically exposed person list. And last would be adverse media. Adverse media means here we are going to verify that whether there are any negative articles with respect to that persons are there or not. And then we will evaluate them. To discuss more on that, sanction screening. When we screen them, like ideally, we should always go by the ID document. Okay, the name which is mentioned in the ID document, that should be referred and entered into the screening software that you are using. Okay, and then the screening must be performed. Once the screening is done, there could be three possible results. Confirmed match. You got 100% match with UNSC consolidated list or UA local terrorist list. Okay, or maybe any other sanction list. But our talking about our specific regulations, we do have a specific requirement, that is fund freeze. Okay, that is only with respect to UNSC consolidated list and UAE local terrorist list, which are the mandatory ones in United Arab Emirates. For other matches, I mean, maybe if you got a match with OFAC, you can evaluate, file a report, maybe SAR, STR, depending upon the case. The second possible match would be partial match. Like the name is partially matching. You are in a dilemma that you cannot even say yes, it's a perfect match, or you cannot even say no, it's a false match. When you are stuck in this situation where few of the key identifiers are matching, key identifiers here would be the name, aka, nationality, date of birth, year of birth. Okay, and you are in a state that you cannot take a decision. In such cases, it would be a partial match. The last possible option would be no match. Means you did not find any match against the sanction list. So I think this is the best thing. You can move ahead, complete the due diligence on board the client. Okay. The next would be adverse media screening. Now, adverse media is actually very, very, very important. Many times, what happens is a person must have done something wrong, but they are not added to the sanction list. That is also very much possible. So, in order to understand that, what is the profile of that particular individual, we must screen that particular person with relevant keywords. Like, for looking at the adverse media, you can write the name, add keywords like crime, crime, laundering, jail, or prison, or smuggling, counterfeiting currency. So these are the keywords which you could use and identify that whether you found a relevant match with respect to your customer or not. If you find a match, you do find an adverse media match, you can identify, look out, read that more, understand the nature of that particular adverse media. Is that affecting the risk or not? Okay. And then you may decide that, okay, I will term this particular customer as high risk, perform enhanced due diligence. Okay. That is the first option. If it seems that, the customer is little risky looking at the background, maybe you found an adverse media which suggests that the person is actually involved into some financial crime activity and he's involved in some laundering case in XYZ country. So there is a possibility that you would not like to work with them, or maybe it's seeming to be suspicious. In such cases, you may consider filing a suspicious activity report in case of your prospects. In case of your existing customers, you may consider filing STR because the transaction would have already been done. If you have not found any matches when you verify the adverse media, then I think it's good. You can go ahead, establish the business. The next would be politically exposed person screen. Again, you can screen that particular person's name with specific keywords like politics or state, government, prominent function, or maybe some kind of bill specific to that particular person, specific to the country. You may search, and then if you get any article which suggests, sometimes you get Wikipedia links also which says that this person is associated with PEP or headed this government for so many years, etc. You do get sometimes these details. And even this kind of results are thrown by the screening software also. Yeah. So that could be very helpful. Now, once you have checked and if you have found a particular person to be a politically exposed person, I would like to clarify this myth, which many people have, is that you cannot work with PEP. No, that is not the case. You can work with the PEP provided you are performing enhanced due diligence. There is no risk in, I would say, you can definitely onboard them, but you have to manage the risk. If you feel a particular customer is risky, a particular politically exposed person is risky, you have to conduct enhanced due diligence. In case of foreign PEPs, okay, in case of international PEPs, you have to by default perform enhanced due diligence. In case of domestic PEPs, you have to apply risk based approach. If you do not found any match, that's perfectly fine. He's not belonging to any politically exposed person category. Establish the business. The next would be customer risk assessment. So far you've already, understood the details. You have KYC documents, you have done screening. The next step would be assessing the risk of the customers. Okay, like for example, if I'm your customer, okay, you would look at where I'm belonging to, what kind of services I'm asking from you, how am I making the payment, or how have you onboarded me, whether you have met face to face or not. Okay, so all of these things are going to contribute to the customer risk assessment. If I'm a politically exposed person, I could be high risk. If maybe I'm doing a cash transaction, which is really very high value, okay, that could be high risk, depending upon the customer risk assessment rules and regulations which are set in your organization. But there are certain circumstances in which law says that you should not onboard, like if you're not identifying the UBO. Okay, it's you must not work with any search company where you are unable to identify who the ultimate beneficial owner is. So if you will see some of the scenarios which are seen on the screen as of now, delivery channel risk, face to face meeting is low risk because you met that person, you have the ID document and you've actually seen that okay, this person exists. Non face to face third party involvement could be medium risk, high risk, depending upon what kind of service is also involved. So when you are evaluating the risk of the customer on all of these factors, nationality or customer, PEP association, a high net worth individual, how am I making the payment, you will reach to a conclusion and bifurcate into low risk, medium risk, or high risk. Okay. Now, this was something which I highlighted that this is very, very, very important, ongoing monitoring. Ongoing monitoring is basically you have onboarded a customer, you have performed screening, you have done risk assessment, but that would be maybe, before you have onboarded that person. But if that particular customer is going to be associated with you for a longer period of time, you cannot stick to the risk which you assessed when you onboarded. No. Now, if risk changes, profile changes, transaction, type of transaction changes, that is also going to affect the risk of that particular customer. For example, you onboarded me. Okay. When you onboarded me, I was a non-PEP. Okay. Later on, as a part of the ongoing monitoring, maybe in your screening software, you got a notification that this customer is now a politically exposed person. So you would have to maybe look into that profile, check whether any additional measures are to be taken or not. That is also one of the way in which you monitor your clients. Secondly, if like the law says that higher the risk, higher the controls, lower the risk, lower the controls. So when I say ongoing monitoring, how frequently I will monitor my clients. So because if any of my customer is high risk, okay, it's obvious I'm going to monitor them more frequently because the risk is high with that particular client. So how frequently I will do my re-KYC, how frequently I'll do my risk assessment. That is also something that we need to document in our policies. Like maybe just giving an example. For low risk, medium risk, you may say that I'll do the re-risk assessment every 1 year. Okay. So I was talking about ongoing monitoring. Okay. Ongoing monitoring is basically where we are making sure that we are, monitoring them on a regular basis with respect to the risk which is allocated to them. Apart from that, that also could be some kind of trigger events. Like as I gave you an example of me suddenly becoming a PEP. Maybe you got an update, there is some new adverse media with respect to me, so that is going to affect my risk. So unless and until we don't have some specific monitoring rules set in our business, we will overlook this, and that is going to affect our company. It's going to be risky when you miss out on certain profiles in the customer. Now, coming to regulatory reporting. So these are the reports which are available in your GoML portal. Okay, GoML portal as in the first requirement which we saw, that we are required to get ourselves registered on GoML portal. Through that portal, you can file all of these reports, which you can right now see on the screen. To just briefly explain them, suspicious activity report. This is something which is filed when there is any kind of attempted transaction, unexecuted. So far transaction is not occurred, but somebody is trying to, uh, you know, uh, get into a transaction with you and which seems suspicious. So in such cases, SAR will go. If the transaction is already done and later you realize that yes, okay, this was something suspicious when I did earlier, that is, in such cases, you will file suspicious transaction report. Then comes partial name match report and fund freeze report. This is specifically with respect to the mandatory sanction list in United Arab Emirates. That is UNSC consolidated list and UAE local terrorist list. So if you find 100% confirmed match with this two specific list, you will have to file fund freeze report. If it's partially matching, then you will file PNMR. Then we have a high risk country activity report and high risk country transaction report. This is with respect to if there are any kind of remittances, okay, which are going to uh, which will be initiated, or you are going to transfer that money from UAE. Like the money is coming from that specific country to UAE or from UAE to that country. Now to that country, here we are talking about high risk jurisdiction, that is North Korea, Iran, and Myanmar. Okay, these are the three countries which are considered as high risk. So in such cases, you are first required to file HRCA, that is, you are expecting some kind of activity. Then you have to wait for approximately 3 days, then conduct the transaction, and then report that transaction by filing high risk country transaction report. This is with respect to all of the transactions happening between UAE and Iran, North Korea, and Myanmar. And the last two, which are specific to the sectors, like dealers in precious metals and stones are required to file DPMSR. This is with respect to all of the cash transactions exceeding 55,000 dirhams and wire transfers. So basically, the transactions which are happening with respect to purchase sale of precious metals and stones involving cash or wire transfer exceeding 55,000 dirhams, in such cases, we have to file DPMSR. Now, this is specifically with respect to real estate agents and brokers and lawyers. If lawyers get involved in real estate transaction, then REAR, Real Estate Activity Report. Now, this is to be filed when the property in question is freehold property, the buyer is paying to the seller in cash greater than 55,000 dirham, cryptocurrencies, or proceeds of cryptocurrencies. In such cases, REAR is required to be filed. Here we are only looking at the transactions which are happening between the buyer and seller. Okay, here the real estate agents and brokers are not required to submit the report for the commission which they have received. Okay, so there's a difference. So request you to scan this QR and answer the quiz. Let's see how many responses we have received. Okay. Which of the following best describes the purpose of ongoing sanction screening? So majority of you have selected again the correct answer, that is to detect new risks such as if the customer is added to the sanction list after onboarding. Correct. So basically screening is something which is done prior to onboarding. Okay. Prior to any kind of transactions you do, if there are any changes in the profile of the customer, and fourth, if there are any changes in the sanction list. Okay, so the answer that you have selected is absolutely right, to detect new risks such as if a customer is added to sanction list after onboarding. The next question, a corporate service provider, a corporate service provider has a client who was onboarded as a holding company with no operational activity. The client was rated low risk. After a year, the firm notices the client has opened multiple new bank accounts, added foreign subsidiaries, and started issuing large invoices. No updates were provided by the client regarding this change. What is the most appropriate response? Okay, majority of you have selected request updated documents, reassess the customer risk profile and consider applying EDD. And few of you have also considered immediately file an STR for suspicious change of the business model. So here the correct answer is request updated document. So unless and until you have not received the updated documents, assessed the risk, it would be very inappropriate to without doing any kind of investigation and reaching to a conclusion that STR be filed. Okay, so it's important that we first assess, we receive the required document, reassess the customer risk, and then consider applying EDD if they still turn out to be as high risk customer. So we are reaching towards the end of the webinar. I'm sorry I've taken a little more time today, but please bear with me. So then the second last topic is with respect to record keeping. Record keeping is basically where we are maintaining the records, okay, for say for example policy, due diligence, whatever updates we have done, we are doing ongoing monitoring. Okay. So in such cases, for how long we are required to maintain the records? For all of the UAE mainland and free zones, the requirement is 5 years. For ADGM companies and DIFC, the requirement is 6 years. Okay. And the last, independent audit. So far in our webinar early today, we have discussed what are the key elements of compliances. How do we make sure that we are at the top of it by providing training, having policies, doing KYC, doing screening, risk assessments, etc. But in order to understand that, by complying with the rules and regulation, is there anything that I'm still missing? Are there any gaps which are there in what I'm implementing in my organization and what does the law say? Okay, or what I have written in the policy and what I'm actually doing. Okay, in order to understand these gaps, independent audit becomes an integral part. It can be done by internal or external auditor. In case of large organizations where you do have an independent team who can conduct the audit, you can have that in house. But if it is a small organization and there is no one called as independent, in such cases, you are required to have an external auditor to check the AML CFT compliances of the organization. Now, it is very different from the financial audit. Okay, AML CFT audit is different from the financial audit. So we should not get confused. Any person who has the sound knowledge of AML CFT regulations has expertise. They have the knowledge of the sector, okay, and the kind of the business that you are into, of course, because they would have certain kind of experience. In such cases, only these persons can conduct the audit of your organization. And basically, audit is again that is going to help you to understand the gap between maybe what is law, what is written in the policy, and if how well are you implementing. Maybe you are doing KYC, but you are missing out on re-risk assessment, or re-KYC is getting missed out. Or maybe the policies, procedures, and enterprise-wide risk assessment are not done on an annual basis. So this is something which will be highlighted in the independent audit. Or maybe the mitigation measures, the kind of the approach that we have when we are allocating the risk, if that is also not correct, still that will be highlighted in the AML safety audit process. So the last is that I'll discuss that what are the best practices that one can implement. We have to understand our own company business. That is very important. We cannot, just rely on some standard template that we have and put our name, put our company name and, have it. That is completely wrong. AML CFT policy risk assessment is a customized approach that has to be specific to a company. It cannot be that one size fits all. That approach should not be there. Maybe if you have now started complying with the rules and regulations, maybe you can review that on a monthly basis till the time you are on track. Okay, maybe that 1 month can now be extended to 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. But initially, when you've started to comply to make sure that things are in order, the house is in order, you can monitor that on a monthly basis. Make sure that you have allocated somebody from your organization to verify if there are any changes in the regulatory requirement. So that can, because that will completely implement your structure also in the AML CFT policies that you have. That is something that I would like to put across. And also, please understand the requirement of record keeping. Screening is also very, very important. Screening them against the sanction is having ongoing monitoring in place. That is also one of the key requirements. Many times people do implement the screening software, but ongoing monitoring is not supported. So again, you are back to square one. So even when selecting a screening software, all of these things should be in mind. Yeah. So now I'll have the last quiz for the day. I would request all of you to scan and answer the question. I'll wait for few more responses, then I'll discuss this. Okay. So the question is, a corporate service provider, that is a TCSP in Dubai, it's located in mainland, is undergoing an internal compliance review. The compliance officer notices that customer identification documents and transaction records from 3 years ago were deleted to free up the server space. The firm argues that the customers have long since terminated their contracts and no longer pose any risk. What is the most compliant course of action under the UAE AML safety law? Let's see what you have answered. Correct. 97% of you have answered it correctly. Recover and retain the records, as DNFBPs must keep all of the relevant AML CFT documentation for at least 5 years from the date of the termination of the business relationship or transaction. So this is absolutely right. Um, so most of you for the quiz have answered it correctly. Like it was all between the range of above 80%. So I'm really impressed. So now I'll hand it over to Arun to conclude the session. Arun, over to you.
Thank you, Dipali. Thanks. Thank you for the wonderful session. The depth of your expertise has really illuminated these complex compliance topics. And to everyone who participated today, your engagement and the quiz responses have made this a genuinely valuable exchange. We set out to provide clarity on the UAE's AML landscape for DNFBPs, and I hope you're leaving with both a stronger understanding and practical steps to enhance your compliance programs. This conversation doesn't need to end here. We view compliance as an ongoing journey rather than a destination, and we're committed to supporting you every step of the way. Our team at Factum, along with our partners at NIEMA, stand ready to address any follow-up questions or dive deeper into specific areas of interest. In the coming days, you'll all receive an email with the session recording, presentation slides, and a certificate from RapidAML for your participation in this webinar. We'll also be sending out a brief feedback form, and your input there is highly appreciated. For those interested in seeing RapidAML in action, my team is available for personalized demonstrations. Just mention this in the feedback form or reach out directly. Lastly, if you found today's session valuable, we invite you to follow RapidAML on LinkedIn and WhatsApp for ongoing updates, tools, and practical guidance tailored to teams like yours. On behalf of the entire Factum family, RapidAML, and our esteemed partners at NIEMA, thank you for your participation and commitment to compliance excellence. Here's to building stronger, more resilient financial systems together. Until next time.